All right, this one's an honor. Larsen Jensen, how you doing, man?
Honor's all mine. Good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We were on opposing teams many years ago, I guess. Always on the bus together. Never really got to compete against you, but I got to watch you plenty from the side, which was good. It was the best place to be when you were competing on the side. So, but
I can say
I
same thing about you and your events. Like I don't envy that one whatsoever. But I think that the mile stereotypically people don't envy in most cases, and it takes somebody a couple screws loose to go do it. Myself and Grant and all the guys that came before us that really set the stage. So
well, you had an incredible career. Just watching you go and compete, tough. And I want to get into some of that as well. But I'm looking at your LinkedIn bio here, and I'm like, man, this guy has led. I counted 3 lives, and then I was like, no, it's 4. Since you left college, and then you just mentioned you got kids, so it's like you got 5 lives that you've led since you left high school. Basically, you're a graduate of USC and Stanford. You went to Stanford Business School as a graduate, and then you go, obviously your Olympic run that you went on, and then you go into the SEALs, and you're a Navy SEAL for many years, and now you're a founder of a VC firm. So it's like you've led these incredible lives in such a short period of time, man.
I think that I have, and it's crazy to think about. You blink, and my wife and I just had our 10-year wedding anniversary this past year. We have 3 kids, 7, 5, and 1. We've had a number of careers that we've gone through. A lot of, ranging from the military and the SEAL teams to up in the Bay Area to getting in tech and venture capital and investing in startups. It's been a wild ride. And I think in hindsight, if I was to not know about the journey empathetically from my perspective, I would think that all of this was pre-planned and this was part of the journey or part of the story. But as with anything in life, I think there's so much serendipity, so many mentors, so many people that have taken a chance on me and given me the opportunity to work hard and make mistakes and to be there to pick me up where I've made those mistakes and move into these new careers. But you're right, it's been a wild journey, and I never in a million years would have thought we are where we are now when I was swimming, following the black line like we used to do day in and day out. It's definitely fun.
How did let's start with the swimming then. How did the swimming come about? How did that start?
I think very similar to most of the guys we swam with, and most of the people who are out there now. It starts in your backyard pool or your community pool. It starts with a love for the water and needing to perpetually be in it for whatever reason. Maybe it's the chlorine, maybe it's the sensation of weightlessness and being there, but people get addicted to it and love being in the water. And I think that, aquatic disposition is something that hit me at a young age. And it wasn't until, my young adolescence that I really developed the passion for going back and forth. I was one of those kids in my formative years of, summer league swimming that wanted to be the sprinter. I think at the time it's when you have Gary Hall Jr. who's up there wearing his Rocky robe and shorts and stuff like that. That's the cool stuff, right? But I quickly realized that I was more of a slow twitch guy and had a little bit of persistence and grit in me, and all of those things, helped my coaches over the years, help me gravitate towards the distance swimming events. And so for me, as you know, definitely specialized in different distance freestyle, 400, 1500, or in yards, 500, 1650. And that was my bread and butter for a while. And I think there's a certain degree of passion and, history that's in those events that's really unique. I mean, all these events have a lot of, history and passion, but I think for me, I really was drawn towards those distance events. Never so much in the open water stuff. One of my teammates, Os Maluli, went out there and won all those gold medals and stuff like that. But open water was I think, a little bit before my time.
Never got pulled in that direction. What was the first? What was the first team you made? You qualified for the U.S.?
It was Pan Pacs in 2002 in Japan. That was my first U.S. team.
Okay, that was the one where you're part of my Grant Hackett story. Have you ever heard that story before?
I'm nervous to hear it, but excited at the same time.
It was that meet 2002. So Grant was on a run. Grant was obviously the guy at the
Yeah.
time, and he was winning a lot and doing great things. World championships the year before, broke the world record,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So we go to, I believe we went to the Commonwealth Games before the Pan Pacs, and we knew that after after Commonwealths, we were coming to face the US. So it's like we have this incredible, over the other side of the globe competition. And then we come over to Japan to face the mighty US, and by the time Grant had gone through his full run of events and got to the 1500, I mean, he was completely exhausted this one day. And I was trying to think to myself, like, what can I say to Grant that's going to really get him going here? Because like, I didn't know what to do. I'd never seen Grant down and kind of feeling low and not really motivated. Grant was always motivated. So like when you come to this end of this run of this massive competition schedule over the course of a month and traveling the world, he was, deservedly so exhausted. So I remember coming off the bus and I remember sitting with you or near you on the bus. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to use him as someone to get to Grant. So I go over to Grant on the massage table and I said, how you feeling, buddy? He's like, oh, I'm dead. I'm done. Like I'm toast. I got nothing left. I'm like, oh man, that's a shame. Cause I was sitting on the bus with the Americans and I was listening to Larsen Jensen, Eric Beine, and they were talking about how they're finally going to kick your ass, like this is the year they're going to get.
We probably were saying that, we probably were. We're guilty of a lot of things, and having a small mouth wasn't one of them.
No, you were very nice,
and,
very polite. You weren't saying anything like that, but yeah, it was just a fun one. So Grant went out and ripped a 1500.
He ripped, man. He ripped as he always did. Tremendous, guy for the sport. I mean, amazing guy.
Yeah, what's it like when you got a competitor like that in the pool, at least, and you're at the top of your game. You're going into Athens, and I'd imagine you felt pretty good about that too. Like you're in a pretty good position there, and you got to race a guy like Grant Hackett. What's that like?
I'd be curious to hear what he would say about it too. Not so much as it relates to me, but I think it probably different ends of the spectrum in terms of the competition, because I don't think I was ever the favorite or the top dog or what have you. I always had a stalking horse. I always had like this luminary, this legend in distance swimming, and Grant Hackett chase after, who set the standard, the world record holder. Like just obviously you guys have a rich history of this in Australia, and so I think from my perspective, it was. He had a bullseye on his back and I was going for him and I wanted to beat him. And I thought that I could. I had to drop a ton of time in order to do it. But that was really a huge motivation for me throughout the season was, having that target on the back of Grant's back and thinking that I could pull it off. And I got close in 04, with about 100 to go, we were even. But he's more experienced, stronger, bigger, all these things, and had a lot, had the ability to pull through and touch the wall first and beat me by, I think a second and a half or something like that, which seems further apart than it was with 100 to go there. And I look back on that experience, and at the time, obviously, it's funny. I was talking with a friend of mine today, and he's like, Larsen, you've gotten second, third, fourth, and fifth in the Olympics. And I for whatever reason, never really realized that. And so I'm pretty good at like that middle pack of the finals at the Olympics, but I'm missing sort of like the 8th and whatever 7th, and I'm missing the gold. But I look back on that race and think that it's, speaking of, Gary Hall and Rocky and all that stuff, that, I was the newcomer. Maybe, I looked at myself as sort of like the Rocky, and he's sort of the Apollo Creed, and I didn't beat him, but I went the distance with him. And I think I made him work for it. And, I certainly did too. So that was an amazing race and a great time. And obviously to do it in the birthplace of the modern Olympic Games made it even more special.
Yeah. And then, you obviously have a run for the next 4 years, and you go to the next Olympics, and you're successful there as well. In that time, are you starting to think beyond swimming at that point in time, or was it kind of like, did you need to kind of stop and then kind of collect yourself after 08?
I was, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, especially with the other guests you've had on, and the people you've coached over time. I think that for better or worse, there's this post-Olympic reset, and people sort of struggle with figuring out do you want to recommit for 4 more years? And although there's tremendous events, whether it be NCAAs, national championships, other international meets, in the sport of swimming, nothing holds a stick to the Olympics.
Right.
You could have a unblemished career and not do well at the Olympics. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter as much. Yep. And so I think that's something that people really struggle with, is recommitting, getting back on the horse and riding as hard as you can for 4 more years. And with all the ups and downs and, the breakdowns and tapers. Swimming's a hard sport. I think it's arguably the hardest sport out there mentally for people. And here's why. It's one of the few sports where you are alone with your thoughts and nothing else, with no other stimulation. You're not seeing a change of scenery. You're not really talking to people unless you're on the wall and you can get a few words out in between a sip of water or Gatorade. But you're really alone with the pain and alone with the focus and alone with your thoughts, which can be a dangerous thing, especially as you're working hard. And so I think for me, to your point, it was about midway through that, where, about 2 years away from the 2008 Olympics. And I started to have a little bit of that crisis of identity of like, do I, not only want to go to 2008, I knew I wanted to give it a shot there, but I don't want to go again and go to 12, and maybe got in my own head a little bit about what I wanted to do. And I think that especially these days, guys are swimming later, like there's more, influencer money in the sport. There's all these things that people can afford to keep it going a little bit later. But I wanted to do something different. I wanted to test myself in a new way. I've always enjoyed that about sports and about swimming, is you have the opportunity to really see what you're made of. And you, at the end of the day, don't have anybody to blame but yourself. Like you can make excuses. You can say the dynamic wasn't right. The water temperature was off, or the pool hours weren't great. But at the end of the day, it's really on you. And so I loved that spirit of testing yourself. And I wanted to test myself again. And I wanted to test myself in a situation where the stakes are high. And so that drew me to the special operations community in the United States, more specifically the SEAL teams. And I think I got that in droves. It was just an amazing experience, was certainly tested, to a level that was on par or greater than, competing in the Olympics. And I got to do so with guys that I counted on and guys that counted on me. Probably similar in a different way, to being on a relay, right? Everyone counts on each other to not get a false start and to give it their best effort and to do something special. And I think in the SEAL teams, you have that day in and day out. And I think that's something I was really craving. And I think I got.
What was your first interaction with the possibility of the SEAL teams? All right, you're an Olympic athlete, you're training for the Olympics, but then I just remember that, within a very short amount of time, I'm back on the pool deck at the World Championships, and people are saying, "Oh, Larsen Jenson's a Navy SEAL." And I'm like, "What? No, he's an Olympic swimmer." And all of a sudden, it was just like bam. So it was like, "Wow, that's impressive." So what was that?
As you get older, everything seems like a time warp, doesn't it? This is like, this year it's 20 years from our 2004 games. Like,
wow,
where did time go? I think I've got the gray hairs to prove it at this point. But I think for me, it was something I was considering for a while. And I remember having a decision point where it was basically trifold: continue swimming, which is a great option. I had great coaches, swam for Coach Bill Rose, swam for Coach Mark Schubert, swam for Coach Dave Salo, all with different styles and really useful ones to help develop me, not only as an athlete, but as a man, which I think is really important. Go, into a more traditional job, which arguably maybe, what I'm doing in finance now, I would characterize back then in my level of thinking in terms of it being more traditional. Or do something that you probably have to do when you're young. Swimming or the military is something that the advantages of youth are important. And so I sort of felt like if I didn't give it a shot, I would likely look back on that and regret not giving it my all. And being in my early 20s, I felt I was in the prime physical condition to go out there and give it my best. and have some decent recovery to boot. And we had some guys in our SEAL training class that, we called grandpa, that were 30 years old. And like at the time we thought that was old. But it does make a difference, right? That decade makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, my business partner here on the podcast and my producer, Nate, he lives in Virginia Beach, and and he coaches these guys. Like he does some swim coaching for the operations guys. And he's like, all right, Brett, he was so excited when I was going to, do this podcast with you. He's like, you got to ask him about buds. I want to know everything about buds. I just want to know, like, how hard is it? What's the difficulty? How do you get through it? Does swimming set you up for it? Like, I don't know. So this whole buds thing, man, obviously in the past few years, more and more people are talking about it, and it's come to the light of, like, the things you have to go through to get there. But, like, what was the experience like for you?
It's a crucible moment. Literally and figuratively. It is a crucible. It is a selection process, and they make it intentionally extremely arduous. And I look back, I remember on Thursday of Hell Week, and I guess just for some context for the listeners on what BUDS is before, to set the table a little bit. So BUDS is basic underwater demolition SEAL training. So it's the formative training that anybody who's, enlisted in the military or who's an officer in the military needs to go through before you can join a Navy SEAL team. So it's about 6 months long. It's broken up into different training blocks. First phase is what they call physical conditioning, where they have Hell Week. Second phase is, underwater scuba diving effectively. And third phase is, what they call land warfare, where you get familiar with, weapons and tactics. And so first phase, where the BUDS experience is really what people hear about with Hell Week, which is essentially 5 days and change of very little sleep. I think in our class, we got about an hour and a half nap on Wednesday and an hour and a half nap on Thursday. Man. Prior to going into that experience or really learning about it, I never thought the human body was really capable of doing that. But it's one of the things that really drove me to it, similar to some of the workouts that us crazy distance swimmers would do. Is so, we're like, hey, let's do something crazier than we've ever heard somebody else doing in terms of time, repeats, distance, et cetera, and ideally a combination thereof. And so I was drawn to the challenge. And I remember on Thursday night of Hell Week, for all intents and purposes, you've made it, because I think the greatest amount of people who quit or don't make it through Hell Week, I think it's usually around Tuesday timeframe, to a lesser extent Wednesday, where it's almost a foregone conclusion you're going to make it if you make it to Thursday. And Thursday night, certainly, because you only have one cycle of darkness, one night to get through before you're done the next day. And the night times are the worst because they're the coldest and the bleakest. But I remember Thursday, one of the BUDS instructors, who I would say gave me a lot of extra attention, given my formative experience in swimming, said, all right, hey, like you've sort of gone through Hell Week and you've been to the Olympics, which one's harder? And at that time I'm sleep deprived. I probably am not speaking very clearly or thinking very clearly, but what I recall saying was something to the effect of, training for the Olympics, it's a 4-year or longer journey where you just need to be focused day in and day out and put in that consistency. But I'd never, up until that point, done something with the same intensity for a week-long duration of time of pure physical activity and bluntly harassment from the instructor staff in terms of seeing if you're capable of making it through to being a part of the community and a part of the brotherhood. So it was a great experience. And as they say in the community, it's the best time you never want to have again. So I look back on that probably with some of my fondest memories. Still have some of my closest friends in the world are guys that I went through that experience with and subsequently deployed with. Because I just like in swimming, I think you form the greatest bonds, pardon me, and relationships with people that you go through adversity with. It's great to have friends and all that, but if you really go through something challenging with them and you make it out the other end, you sort of know to your core, like you are totally vulnerable, for better or worse, because you are operating in a sleep deprived environment when your true character comes out and you get to see who's going to put team over self. And that's what the community really screens for.
That's wild, man. Yeah, I'm completely useless without sleep. That's the thing, is I can get through the activity, but you deprive me of sleep and I'm just absolutely useless. So I wouldn't
Well,
make it.
I am too these days, but it teaches you. I mean, uh, with context, things, I think with experience, you gain context. With context, you
Mm,
know more of what you're capable of, and, you
mm,
become more worldly. I would say the same thing with the national team trips we've been on or the meets you go to. With that experience, you sort of know how to handle the pressure better, how to handle the recovery better, how to listen to your body better. And if needed, just like in your Grant Hackett story, where he's been cranking multiple events per meet, multiple meets in a row for a couple months, at some point, that you can get through that and still succeed and do so at an elite level. I think in a similar way, that analogy applies to SEAL training as well.
yeah, I'm sure you probably had moments in your training and preparations for multiple Olympics where you did something where you're like, wow, I didn't realize I could do that, but now that I've done it, I'm I've kind of figured that out. So I'm sure at moments like that, you may have referred back to training like that, right? Like for the Olympics,
Yeah.
where you probably going through something you don't think you can get through, and then you remember back like, oh yeah, I can get through that.
Absolutely. And I think that, to one of the comments you brought up earlier, to the question that you were going to ask is, did swimming set me up for success
Mm,
going
right.
into that career? And I'd say
Yeah.
without a doubt it did, but I would say probably not in the way that most people suspect. Although the SEAL teams are a maritime based special operation unit, more specifically, like, in other words, we operate in the water, like,
Hmm.
always 1 foot in. That the heritage is from, the UDTs of the World War II era, the people that were, clearing the beaches in advance of, the ground invasion of Normandy. So that is really the heritage of the community, and being comfortable in the water is a prerequisite to everybody. But if you had to break down the amount of time you spend uh, swimming in the water, going through
Mm,
buds or going through Hell Week, it's, minuscule compared to the amount of time that you're running on land and carrying heavy things and
mm,
doing other variety of things that are more land based, I would say. And so, for me, I think that swimming helped. The water stuff was frankly not an issue, just like it wouldn't be an issue for
yeah.
any, I would say, college swimmer or certainly Olympic swimmer, in terms of breath holds and things like that. But the on land stuff was challenging. Because
Yeah.
you know how swimmers run. That people make fun of swimmers and their running ability in large part because they're, floppy feet and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And so I definitely got my share of grief coming my direction in that regard. But what helped me the most, I would say, is having these these coaches that were very hard on me, and were hard on me, not in a bad way, but because they wanted me to fulfill my potential.
Right.
And I think that I took that same perspective with our SEAL instructors. They're hard on everybody. They make your life as miserable as possible. But if you reframe the reason why and you understand why, it's because they're the gatekeepers to teammates that are going to be serving in life and death situations.
Hmm.
So there is a real noble reason for people to be hard on you. The same way I would say there's a noble reason for swim coaches to, give you a prescription for extra yardage if you deserve it and you need it, right? Or,
Yeah.
some harder repeats. And
Right.
so I would say anybody that comes from, whether it be swimming more specifically or more generally an athletic background, that has had to endure coaches that don't just let you do whatever you want. I think you're probably in a good position going into that crucible.
Which one of those three coaches set you up the best then? Who was the hardest on you out of those three?
I don't think I can pick one. They're all just different in different ways. I remember, so, whether it be Coach Rose, who I would say in my adolescence really was helpful and helped to harness that. We had an analogy in the SEAL teams that I think is reminds me of Coach Rose, is that you really want to work with guys who you need to pull in on the reins versus letting them out. Really hard to have somebody achieve their full potential if you're constantly trying to let out the reins, if you will.
Mm,
And I think that Coach Rose, had a unique balance of doing both with me, helping to temper me when I needed to be,
mm,
and helping to let me run when I had the opportunity to. And I would say so. He was definitely extremely important in my swimming career. I don't think be an Olympic medalist without him.
Mm.
And then Coach Schubert, similarly, I mean, huge, pedigree of bringing multiple Olympians to the Olympic team and specific to the distance events. And then subsequently when he left USC and Coach Salo came in, that was a big unknown for a lot of people. And I think for me and Ose as well, like Coach Salo was labeled as a sprint coach, right? That's what everyone thought of him as. And I think up until me and Ose, like, I don't think he had like a distance guy that, was a medalist. And I could be wrong, but that's what I recall being the case. And then all of a sudden he has, Ose that wins the mile, me that gets, bronze in the 400, Ose wins the open water gold and all this stuff. And so I think a lot of those, unfair assumptions were dispelled. But I think it was a completely different type of training under Coach Salo. And I'd be really curious to see what it's like now, how it's evolved even to this day. Because I imagine folks are just so much more disciplined about, nutrition and training and recovery and things of that nature. At least that's my, presumption of how things are these days. But back then it was definitely a meat grinder.
It's funny that you should say that, because actually I'm gonna go full screen here. Dave Salo actually just sent me a photo of his practice today. It's like buds training. He's got people in full jeans and t-shirts. He's doing some buds training out there.
I love it. And I think that's one of the great things about Coach Salo is he, as I mentioned, I think swimming is probably the most mentally draining sport that I know of.
Right.
Because so often you are just alone with the black line and your thoughts, which cannot always be productive. But Coach Salo had this knack for making things interesting, for making them creative, for making you excited to show up to the pool because you never knew what you were going to get. And expecting like competition and high level performance and out of every single repeat. And so it really was a very quality orientation towards what we were doing. Like, you better do something special, or why are you even doing it, kind of thing, regardless of whether or not you're diving off the blocks with full clothes and, all that or not.
Yeah. I had one last question about buds. In terms of the swimming side of it, you did say it was fairly small, but what was the hardest swimming part of buds? Like when you were in it, and you probably look around and smirking a little bit like, I got you guys on this one at least, So what was the hardest part of buds that you probably felt the most comfortable in the swimming side?
Well, essentially going through buds, you would have essentially weekly timed 2-mile ocean swims. So that was, pretty much the extent of it. And then at the end of second phase, they'd have, I believe it was a 4-mile like timed ocean swim. And, the top.
So you're doing
swimmers,
backstroke then, you're cruising. Really.
I don't want to like, act like, too egotistical, but, for you too, like for anybody that's been like an elite college swimmer, it's really not that complicated. Okay. I would say the hardest part of buds for me as a former swimmer, as it relates to aquatic things, was pool comp, which happens in second phase. They essentially put you at the bottom of the pool. You have your scuba gear on, and they simulate a variety of underwater emergencies. And you have to go through emergency procedures in order to get through them. And so what that means is you better have a minutes-long breath hold and be able to calm your heart rate, maintain your composure, and work through tangles in your equipment to get your air supply or oxygen supply back to you without passing out underwater. So I think water has the ability, and the sea has the ability to humble you faster than I think most other environments can, because it literally is life and death underwater, because you need your air supply. And so I look back on all the different swimming things and water evolutions that we had, and I'd say pool comp, even as a former Olympic swimmer, it depends on the instructors you get and how hard they want to go on you. And they definitely made it hard on me and everybody else there. I'm not unique in that regard. And a funny other story is when we got to the end of second phase, the waterman's trophy or I guess category for the open water swim, and everybody was sort of giving me some grief, saying, "Hey, am I going to swim the fastest 4-mile open water swim and in SEAL team history or in Bud's history and all this stuff?" And I frankly thought I would. But as things go, and as the sea gods would allow, we had like this massive sea state. We almost canceled the swim that day, but of course we don't, because when things are hard, you just step up and make them even harder. And yeah, it wasn't even close. I think half the class was blown completely off course and like didn't even like finish it. We finished it, but I'm not even on the list. And so that's something that people like to give me grief of, like former college swimmers that go by, they'll text me out every now and again. It's like, I thought you're like an American record holder. You're not even on the list of this thing at all anywhere. And I'm like, well, I could make excuses, but nobody's going to like pay attention to them. So yeah, I'm not.
Yeah. In terms of the numbering of SEALs, like you have different numbers. Talk to us about the numbering and how you get allocated to a certain number in the SEALs.
Yeah. So essentially, it's as simple as the West Coast is odd number SEAL teams, and the East Coast is even number SEAL teams. So that goes back of the UDT teams and the SEAL teams. They started a West Coast SEAL Team 1 and an East Coast SEAL Team 2, and they sort of built it out thereafter. So we have 1, 3, 5, and 7 on the West Coast, and 2, 4, 8, and 10 on the East Coast, with SEAL Team 6 being sort of the special group, I guess you could say, that fits outside of that characterization.
Why is that? Why do they fit differently?
They are sort of the SEALs of the SEALs, if you will. So they are the folks who go through an even greater level of selection that's hard to make it through. So there's, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd suspect a couple thousand Navy SEALs out there, maybe a little more. And only sort of the best of the best are over at SEAL Team 6. That requires another layer of training and selection. That, from my understanding, I never went through it, but I have friends that did and who are over there. Requires just more tactics, and obviously there's conditioning and new stressful things and all of that go through it. So I would say you can generally think of that organization as like the best SEALs in the SEAL teams by and large. I think is a good characterization. So
what number was your team numbered?
I was on the West Coast my entire career. So I was at SEAL Team 5 primarily.
Okay. Nice. And then how much of your time in the military are you allowed to talk about, or even want to talk about? Because I know like there's so many things these days. You see shows, you see people writing books, you see people doing podcasts, things like that. But I know that within the military itself, it's like, you guys like to keep that between you guys, obviously.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a negative perception of people that generally write books about their experience or want to use, I think, the SEAL experience to further their personal brand. And I think people in the SEAL teams really, personify the quiet professionalism that you don't want to talk about your work. And that's really part of the SEAL ethos, is that quiet professionalism and, excellence to your craft. And, some of the missions that people go on demand that by nature of this, the national security side of the house. I think I've gone through an evolution of this. I think while on the SEAL teams, I was very awkward about it. I was so awkward about it that when I'd go to an event with my wife and, even some family, I'd, go through these layers of the onion that people would go through. Like, what do you do for work? Oh, I'm in the military. What do you do in the military? Oh, I'm in the Navy. What do you do in the Navy? Oh, I'm in the SEAL teams. And like, it's sort of like, it takes so long to get to the crux of like what you actually do. And it's not because people are like mean or whatever, but like, it just got so awkward. So at one point my wife's like, it's super awkward if you act like that. Why don't you just like tell them what you do? Like, no hiding it. Like, you're not trying to like brag about it. It's the reality. And so I think for my own career, I've gone through that evolution as well. Whereas I think while in the military, people are encouraged not to talk about it. And I think that's by and large the right thing. I think outside of the military, it's probably by and large for people to just sort of like beat their chest about how special they are, because at the end of the day, I don't think I am. And I think that the people that go out there and brag about it, I don't think they are. There's tremendously brave and selfless people that we've worked with that have paid the ultimate price for their buddies and for their country. And I think that we should really admire that with a deep degree of humility. But that said, like, it's part of what I've done. Like I can't just put like a big gap in my resume, for a lack of a better term. And I think we're all a creature of your formative experiences. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't have the opportunity to swim for Coach Rose, for Coach Schubert, for Coach Salo. I wouldn't have the opportunity to be doing what I am now and use all those lessons and that mentality if I wasn't trained by some of our nation's bravest warriors in the SEAL teams, of which they're all better than me. I mean, I don't think that I hold a stick to many of my peers and my comrades there. They're just fantastic people and far braver than I'll ever be. But I do think that failing to acknowledge that it happened is sort of not realistic either. And so I think I use those experiences in swimming and in the military to form how I think about my new career and the types of people we want to work with and partner with as we, move forward in our existing business model. So it's something I'm very proud of, but I tend to talk more about, in a social situation, I'm more happy talking about my Olympic experience and trying to beat Grant Hackett or whatever it is than I do about my SEAL experience.
Well, I'm sure your teammates obviously relied on you too, and it was the reason that you made it through and did that so many years. You were obviously good at what you did too. So I think you're a little light on yourself in terms of the way that they depended on you just as much as you depended on them, for sure. And it kind of it brings up the next point of, like, when I look at you, and I don't mean this as an insult at all. I mean, you're a very good looking man. You're very well put together. You got really nice
insults. That's fine.
You got beautiful hair, nice eyes.
Yeah,
I'm like,
man,
he's a good looking guy. But like, if I was sitting next to you at a bar, I wouldn't think you're a trained killer, like, but I watch a lot of UFC too. And I'm thinking to myself, like, now I know why I don't pick fights with anybody, traffic lights and in lines at Starbucks, anybody. Like, if I'm looking at you, I'm like, oh, I could take that guy, no problem. And then you turn around and you're a trained SEAL. It's like, the
problem is you don't know what I'm carrying in my belt, so there's a way to even most confrontations, unfortunately. And so, you got to be careful about those things. And I totally agree. I think it's the people with the experience where they've been in dangerous situations. And I hear this the most from people that I know who are, MMA fighters, et cetera. And they're the last people ever looking for, a fight out there. They're the most disciplined about that and avoiding it and like checking their ego and saying, am I really going to do this, or am I going to just, let it go? What's going to get the best of me? And controlling your emotions and ego, especially in those situations, is extremely important.
Right. Now, you go, well, you're in the SEALs for what, 6-7 years, something like that?
That's right. Yep. Half a dozen years.
So how do you know when time's up for that? You go through this swimming career where you kind of feel it. What about on the military side?
I think it's a similar sensation where I sort of felt it, but for different reasons. I think we went through the reasons why, I felt like moving on from my swimming career and doing something in the military was the right call. I think when I got in, I had every anticipation of making a career out of it, making it 20 years and doing a longer term thing like that. But, life throws changes your way, and the situation changes frequently. And I think that, I think that it's important to be prepared to have open eyes and decide what's around the next corner and where the priorities are. And so for me, I got engaged to, my college sweetheart, essentially, before my first deployment, married thereafter. And ultimately I saw, firsthand through a lot of my, friends who had been in for a long time, the challenges in terms of managing a strong family life with a strong professional life. And as a career in the military, probably not specific to the SEAL teams, but that's what I know. You're gone a lot. You do an average of a deployment every 2 years, and those deployments are 6 to 8 months in length. And those, in those intermittent 18 months, you're gone a lot. And I think at the time I had zero appreciation because I was either single or a newlywed, didn't have kids, of the guys that were gone, who've been gone half a dozen plus deployments, and their kids have like grown up. And, by the nature of the job and the sacrifice that they paid for the country, it takes a toll on the home front. I like to think, and I think it's, common knowledge that the real warriors in the SEAL teams are the wives. Those are the warriors for sure, who make sure that, everything is, stable on the home front and can, manage raising kids. And a lot of times when, the dad is away in very dangerous situations, that takes a toll. And so I think for me at that juncture, it led to another sort of decision point. Like, should I, similar to how I made that decision, should I continue and try and go for another Olympic Games? Should I continue and do another rotation or two in the SEAL teams? Or should I, move on to something different? And I think that the catalyzing thing for me was seeing guys that I admire and that were my, mentors who had done 20 and getting out. They in the military, you will do a career change. If you got in the military in your early 20s and you do 20 years, you are changing careers again in your 40s, like it or not. Like, that's just sort of what happens. Like, you retire after 20 years, basically. And there's some exceptions, but that's practically the case. And so all those things combined, me saying, like, all right, well, at some point I'm going to have to make a career change. I'm still relatively young in my career. We're in the process of starting a family. Maybe it's better for me to do now. And that was really what led me to consider doing something different again.
Yeah. So what was that then? So like you're at this crossroads again of like thinking, all right, what's my next path? And then you end up at Stanford. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You decided to go to Stanford and get another degree?
That's right. Man, that was a hard trade-off, being a USC guy going up to Stanford. I felt like a sellout. But no, in all seriousness, they've got an amazing program up there. Really, obviously in the heart of Silicon Valley. Really intertwined with the entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem. And I had some friends of mine from undergrad who had navigated that to some degree of success previously and were starting a new thing. And I like to tell them to this day that they're to blame for me getting into the startup and venture capital ecosystem, because they helped to mentor me through it and introduce me to people. And I became infatuated by entrepreneurship. I saw so many things in the founders that are starting companies that I saw in elite athletes and in elite special operators, people that had a vision, that were willing to grind and in many cases sacrifice a lot to accomplish that vision, people that were creative, that were hardworking, and were in many cases trying to build something for the greater good and to do something for their teammates, AKA employees, for their investors, for their customers, and for society as a whole, if it's a really important technology business. And I was infatuated by that. And I also felt like it was quite interesting to see that, in the military world, the SEAL teams are inherently one of the least bureaucratic organizations out there. Still, there is no such thing as, a 25-year-old admiral. It just doesn't exist. I don't think it, maybe it's never existed. Maybe it did during the Revolutionary War, but certainly not since. And what I saw in Silicon Valley was, although rare, the potential for young, kids, young ladies and gentlemen, to figure out a way to transform a whole industry. And I thought that was just fascinating and unbelievable. And I couldn't see something else like that anywhere else in our economy. And so I was gravitated towards that because I think it's similarly aspirational to wanting to make an Olympic team or wanting to be, in the SEAL teams. There is sort of like a gravitas to that. And so that's really the reason why I went hook, line, and sinker and all into that sector. And fortunately, I think it's worked out decently thus far, but still have a long ways to go.
Yeah. So talk to me about Harpoon Ventures, a VC firm that you founded, I imagine with some other people, and it's doing remarkable these days, man.
I appreciate that. We think we're doing all right. But we are, just so the listeners know, we are a venture capital firm. Our mandate is to have some set of people, pensions, endowments, family offices, et cetera, invest in our fund. And out of that fund, we then take that pool of capital and we invest it into a series of underlying portfolio companies that are startup technology businesses. Our observation, and what I think that we uniquely have some domain expertise in, is helping companies that we invest in understand how to do business with Uncle Sam. And that was essentially born out of this thesis that this modern era of technology is going to have further reaching geopolitical and national security implications than any other era of technology, certainly in my lifetime. More akin to the space race in the 60s and 70s. And I think that's what's really occurring now as we start to see the emergence of AI proliferating into literally everything. It's probably in this podcast software. This new technology in space, in biotech, and cybersecurity, and enterprise infrastructure, and the cloud. All of these things are extremely important technology areas that I think uniquely the United States has the opportunity to continue to build upon, to continue to make us a more prosperous, society. And so I think that that's something that's really exciting to me. And that's what our fund does. We invest our capital and look for those startups and look for those founders that are deep domain expertise in those types of technology areas. Sometimes they're a first-time founder that's just this protege, amazing, young lady or gentleman that's doing something really special in these areas. Maybe they've never started a business before, but they have a very special technology that's 10x better in the form of cheaper, faster, et cetera, for their set of technology customers. Alternatively, it could be repeat entrepreneurs, people that have started and sold a business previously and are starting something new in an area that they really know a lot about. That's our mandate as a venture capital fund. And I think it scratches my creative itch every single day because I would say probably 99 times out of 100, I am the least informed person in a conversation that I'm in. And I love, I guess, swimming in the deep end and trying to figure out how to get up to speed with these folks and trying to suss out who is really on to something unique. And who, provides us the best opportunity for us to partner.
I was going to say, you like risk, don't you? You're really into risk, and I guess you're into mitigating it, but you like risk as well.
I think it's an interesting topic, and I think it's something that I think a lot about, is the concept of risk. And I think there's different types of risk. Right. In some ways, the most risky thing to do is nothing, right. Because you can't fully understand the opportunity cost. So in other words, maybe the safe thing to do in the swimming world is to stay with your existing program, perhaps. But if you get the sense that, you'd like to make a change, or you see a new program out there that you're drawn to, and maybe it's worth the risk. And I think in my case, I left my house, my hometown, when I was 16 years old to go swim for Coach Bill Rose down in Mission Viejo. And that was a risk, right? Like things could have not worked out. Right. And but I generally think that people tend to take less action, and I would prefer to risk by taking action. That doesn't mean it's always going to pay out. And I think one of the important things to understand is that nobody in life is going to remember your failures. They're only going to remember your successes. And so, but interestingly, I think cognitively and psychologically speaking, like the failures hurt the ego more than the successes feel good. But I think if you just zoom out a little bit and think about the risks that you take on a personal level, you just need one or two things to really work really, really well in your career and in your life. And those things, if they're of a significant enough magnitude, they make up for all the failures you've had along the way. And I've certainly had, way more failures than I've had successes. Fortunately, I think some of the successes have just outweighed, the failures.
How do you decide who you ultimately invest in, and how big is the portfolio? I mean, how many people are you guys actually investing in right now?
Yeah, we generally invest in about 20 to 30 companies in a given fund. Okay. So for context, right now, we just raised about $125 million in our most recent fund, and we divide that up into about, let's call it 25 companies. And so that's, a pretty, I would say, diversified, set of companies for us to hold on to. But venture capital is an odd asset class that's not normal for normal asset classes. The presumption is that half of these companies or so will go to zero. We will lose all of our money on a third to half of the companies that we invest in.
Yeah.
The 3 to 5 that really work out need to work out very, very, very large. And that's sort of the challenge. And so when we think about risk appetite, we want to back founders who, in the off chance that they're successful, they get so large that it changes how an industry works. That is not going to happen most of the time. And most of the companies that we invest in are going to fail for any variety of reasons. Lack of capitalization, lack of customers, product breaks, team breaks up, any variety of reasons. But we need a few that will really take off and be significant and important companies for the foreseeable future of our economy. And so we are really looking for those companies that have transformative potential impacts, that have founding teams that are deeply technical and know how to build something that's very challenging to make. We're looking for a market opportunity that is not saturated, meaning there's not dozens and dozens of competitors there, because it's harder to sell into a saturated market unless your product is literally 10x faster or cheaper. And those are really the things that we look for. And I think timeliness is really important. What's really interesting about the market is there's plenty, all the bad ideas from the dot-com boom have become sort of good ideas of the modern era. It's just that the infrastructure wasn't in place yet. You think of like pets.com or Webvan, grocery delivery. Back then there was huge flame out of capital in the 2000s that occurred. And now we all have on-demand delivery of like whatever we want, just to cherry pick an example. And so it's interesting how like timeliness is really important. There's, I think it's Mark Andreessen that says there's no bad ideas. By the time an opportunity comes to his desk, it's probably a good idea. It's just a question of like whether or not the time and the market, et cetera, supports it right now.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, the fact that you just even went out on your own recently and are doing this as a founder and a partner, I mean, that in itself must be difficult to get people to believe in and buy in for you, right? Like how do you even set the stage to kind of launch something like that in on yourself when you don't have the experience as kind of a company founder in the past,
Yeah, it's very challenging. It's something that people don't talk enough about, I would say, is that founder journey. I think the technology founders, they talk about it a lot. But at the end of the day, it's trust-based. People need to trust us with their capital, that we will execute according to the thesis and strategy that we laid out. And we need to have proof points to illustrate that we are competent in doing so. And it's not just a total leap of faith. And so I think it's a combination of factors for us that gets people comfortable, and not just comfortable, but excited about our value proposition. Part of it, I think, is certainly my background and my rigor from distance swimming to in the SEAL teams, but also I think my education and my mentee relationship with some of the luminaries of Silicon Valley, where I've learned from them, firsthand. And beyond that, I think the uniqueness of our strategy, of it being different. We don't proclaim to be a normal generalist venture capital firm. We believe that there is a catalyst to this era of technology, given what's going on in the technology landscape and the geopolitical landscape, and inserting us in that intersection with specialists in terms of who understands the Silicon Valley landscape as well as the government landscape and the geopolitical landscape, and being at that nexus. There just historically has not been a lot of firms in early stage venture capital that have had that intersection of experiences. And that's what we are bringing to bear for the portfolio companies that we invest in, the founders we invest in. And ultimately, I think that's why limited partners, AKA investor venture capital, invest in us, is for that confluence of expertise that is increasingly unique in Silicon Valley.
Kind of reminds me of, as you were talking there and some of the things you were saying, it kind of reminds me of Zero Dark 30, you know, with they have to be like, listen, you got to trust us. We got a plan. We're going in, we're doing it. But
it's funny. It's obviously very different, but the same principles apply. Whereas the military would call it mission planning and intelligence gathering,
yes,
and, doing all of that, we would call it due diligence, and we wouldn't call it intelligence gathering, but it's the same principles. Like, we need to triangulate on what truth is and make a calculated decision based on how we are going to use our money to buy a piece of a company, based on the information we gather. And the more information we can gather from disparate, nodes in the ecosystem, customers, other investors, industry experts, academia, open source research, et cetera, the more comfortable we can get with understanding if bin Laden's going to be in the house.
Fascinating, man. You're a fascinating person. I think you, again, like I just imagine myself sitting in a bar and having a conversation with a stranger. I feel like you could talk to an athlete, you could talk to a military guy, you could talk to a business person. Like you kind of got this whole range of like different types of conversations you could have with anybody, man. And
thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely try, but lacking in a whole lot of areas as well. And really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fascinating. You're a fascinating person. And I do want to hang out with you more if we ever get the chance. We're not.
Let's do it. I'm not too far away. Yeah, I'm in San Diego.
Yeah.
I know you're up in Irvine. It's a shame that we haven't gotten together more recently. So let's find an excuse.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool, man. In terms of watching military movies, is it like watching a swimming movie where you kind of cringe a little bit? Is there a little bit of that in there, the Hollywood stuff?
I cringe more at the swimming movies, I would say. Okay. So those are more cringeworthy, I would say.
Yeah.
There's been, military movies and war movies going on since, the beginning of film, I'm sure. So I do really enjoy, military movies and military history and all of that. And, I think it's fascinating to me. But I think the closer to home it gets, and, I've been out for a while, so I'm not as fresh up on the, tactics and procedures that people are using these days. But when there is a normal TV, lower production budget situation, like that's not how it works, at all. But there's other ones where, people like, some of my former colleagues consult on those sets, and it's like, incredibly accurate.
That could be another your next part of your life, man. You go into that. So cool, man. Listen, Larsen, it's been fascinating, man. Thanks for catching up. I know you're super busy and doing a lot of stuff, but let's stay connected. All right.
Would love to. Thanks so much for having me today. It's good seeing you, and I hope to see us in person soon.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
All right. See you, brother.
Bye.